My name is Randall, and I am 59 years old. I never thought a single sentence could break a man. But that night at my son's birthday dinner, my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said she'd been disgusted with me since day one. The whole table went silent. I smiled, stood up, and said goodbye to everyone. What she did not know was that 2 hours later a video would play in that restaurant, and when it did, she froze in her chair. Before I continue with what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. What my daughter-in-law said changed everything, but what happened 2 hours later changed it even more. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee back in 1966. My father was a mechanic who ran a small auto repair shop on the east side of town, and my mother stayed home to raise me and my two sisters. We didn't have much money growing up, but we had something that money could never buy. We had love, respect, and the kind of warmth that filled every corner of our little house. My father taught me everything I know about cars. I started helping him in the shop when I was just 14 years old. I remember the first time he put a wrench in my hand and showed me how to change a spark plug. His hands were rough and stained with grease, but they were the strongest hands I ever knew. He used to say that a man who works with his hands is a man who builds with his heart. I never forgot those words. I didn't go to college after high school. Instead, I went straight to work at my father's shop. Some people might say I missed out on opportunities, but I never saw it that way. I loved the smell of motor oil and the sound of engines coming back to life. There was something deeply satisfying about fixing something that was broken, about taking a machine that had given up and making it run again. My father passed away in 1995. A heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while he was working on an old Chevrolet. I found him lying on the floor of the shop, and I held him until the ambulance came. He left me the shop, and I promised myself I would keep his legacy alive. 2 years before that, in 1987, I met the love of my life. Her name was Loretta, and I first saw her at a Sunday service at our local church. She was 22 years old with kind eyes and a smile that could light up any room. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital, and she had the gentlest soul I had ever encountered. I was too nervous to talk to her that first Sunday. But the second week, I gathered all my courage and introduced myself. My hands were clean that day because I had scrubbed them raw the night before, hoping I might see her again. She laughed when I told her I was a mechanic. She said she liked a man who knew how to fix things. We got married in 1989. It was a small ceremony at the same church where we met with about 40 people who loved us. Loretta wore her mother's wedding dress, and I wore a suit I borrowed from my uncle because I could not afford to buy one. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that I was marrying the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Our son Marcus came along in 1991. He was born on a rainy April morning, and when the nurse placed him in my arms, I cried for the first time since my father's death. I looked at that tiny face and made a silent promise that I would give him everything I had. I would work hard, love him unconditionally, and teach him the values my father taught me. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Nashville. It was not fancy, but it was ours. Loretta kept it spotless, and every Sunday she would cook a big meal for us. We would sit around the table, just the three of us, talking about our week and making plans for the future. Those were the happiest days of my life. Marcus grew up knowing the value of hard work. I took him to the shop on weekends, just like my father took me. He was not as interested in cars as I was, but he learned to respect the work. He was smart, much smarter than me, and Loretta and I saved every penny we could to send him to college. He graduated with honors and got a job at a bank in downtown Nashville. I was so proud of him, I could barely speak at his graduation. My son, the banker. My father would have been amazed. But then Loretta got sick. In 2018, she was diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer. The doctor said it had spread too far, and there was nothing they could do except make her comfortable. For 6 months, I did not leave her side. I closed the shop more days than I opened it, and I held her hand through every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment of pain. She passed away on a cool autumn evening, right there in our bedroom with me holding her. Her last words to me were simple. She said she loved me and that I should never let anyone take away my dignity. I did not fully understand what she meant at the time, but I would come to understand it years later. After Loretta died, something changed in my relationship with Marcus. He came home for the funeral and stayed for a week, but then he had to get back to work. I understood. He had responsibilities. But the phone calls became less frequent. The visits became rare. I told myself it was normal that he was building his own life, but deep down I felt the distance growing between us. I kept the shop running because it was all I knew. Working on cars was the only thing that kept me from falling apart, and I held on to the hope that one day Marcus and I would be close again. That is why when he invited me to his 34th birthday dinner, I was so happy I could barely contain myself. I spent a week preparing for that dinner. I got my hair cut for the first time in months. I bought a new suit, the nicest one I could afford, though I knew it would not compare to what his in-laws wore. And I spent hours restoring an old pocket watch that had belonged to my father. It was the most precious thing I owned, and I wanted Marcus to have it. I drove an hour to get to that restaurant with my heart full of hope and that watch carefully wrapped in my pocket. I had no idea that by the end of the night everything would change. The first time I met Brittany was in 2019, about a year after Loretta passed away. Marcus brought her to my house for Sunday dinner, and I could tell right away that she was different from anyone he had dated before. She was beautiful, I will give her that. 30 years old at the time, with perfect hair and expensive clothes. She worked in luxury real estate, selling homes that cost more than I would make in 10 lifetimes. She spoke with confidence, the kind that comes from growing up with money and never having to worry about where the next meal would come from. When she walked into my house, I saw her eyes scan the room. She looked at my old furniture, my worn carpet, the family photos on the wall. And I saw something in her expression that made my stomach tighten. It was not disgust exactly, not yet, but it was close. It was the look of someone who had walked into a place that was beneath them. I tried to make conversation during dinner. I asked her about her work, her family, her interests. She answered politely but briefly, always steering the conversation back to Marcus or to herself. When Marcus told her I owned an auto repair shop, she went quiet. She didn't ask any questions about it. She just nodded and changed the subject. After they left that night, I sat in my empty house and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe she was just nervous meeting me for the first time. Maybe she needed time to warm up. I wanted my son to be happy, and if Brittany made him happy, then I would learn to love her too. They got married in 2020. It was the most extravagant wedding I had ever seen, held at a 5-star hotel downtown. Brittany's family paid for everything, and everything was designed to impress. There were ice sculptures and a 12-piece orchestra and flowers that must have cost more than my truck. I wore my best suit, the same one I had worn to Loretta's funeral, because it was the only formal suit I owned. When I arrived at the venue, one of the wedding planners looked at me like I had walked in through the wrong door. She asked if I was with the catering staff. Brittany's family was there in full force. Her father, Gerald, owned a major construction company. He was a big man with a firm handshake and a way of looking at people that made them feel small. Her mother, Diane, was a successful physician who had retired early to manage their investments. Her younger sister, Courtney, had married into another wealthy family the year before. During the reception, I noticed that my seat was at a table in the corner, far from the main table where Marcus and Brittany sat with her family. I was the only person from my side of the family there. My sisters had passed years ago and I had no other close relatives, so I sat alone at that corner table, watching my son celebrate the happiest day of his life from a distance. Marcus came by once to thank me for coming. Brittany did not come at all. I told myself it was fine that she was busy with her guests. I smiled and clapped when they cut the cake. I stayed until the end because that is what a good father does. In the years after the wedding, the distance between Marcus and me grew wider. He and Brittany bought a big house in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Nashville. I was invited there twice in 4 years. Both times Brittany made sure I knew I was not really welcome. The first time she ordered takeout instead of cooking, saying she did not have time to prepare anything. She spent most of the evening on her phone, barely acknowledging me. When I tried to help clean up, she waved me away and said their housekeeper would handle it. The second time was even worse. They had a 2-year-old daughter by then, a beautiful little girl named Emma. I was so excited to spend time with my granddaughter, but Brittany kept finding excuses to keep Emma away from me. The baby was tired. The baby needed to eat. The baby had a schedule that could not be disrupted. When I asked if I could hold her, Brittany hesitated before handing her over, and she stood right there watching me like she expected me to drop the child. After 10 minutes, she took Emma back and said it was time for her nap. I barely got to see my granddaughter at all. I tried to send gifts for Emma's birthdays and Christmas, toys, books, little dresses, Brittany always responded with a brief text saying they had already bought everything Emma needed and that I should not bother. After a while, I stopped trying. The invitations stopped coming. Marcus would call me once a month, sometimes less, and the conversations were always short. He was busy with work. Brittany had plans. They were traveling. There was always an excuse. When Marcus called to invite me to his 34th birthday dinner, I was shocked. He said it would be at a nice restaurant called the Capitol Grill and that Brittany's family would be there too. I did not care about the restaurant or her family. I just wanted to see my son. I got ready that evening with more care than I had taken in years. I scrubbed the grease from under my fingernails until they were almost raw. I put on my new suit and checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked old, I thought. Older than I felt. But my eyes still had some life in them, and my heart was full of hope. I put the restored pocket watch in my coat pocket and drove to the restaurant. When I walked in, I was immediately aware of how out of place I looked. The other diners wore clothes that probably cost more than my car. The waiters moved with practiced elegance. Everything gleamed under soft golden lights. I found the table in a private section at the back. Gerald and Diane were already there, along with Courtney and her husband. Brittany sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. Marcus was beside her, looking handsome in a suit that probably cost $1,000. There was one empty seat, and it was between Courtney and the wall, the least desirable spot at the table. I smiled and said hello to everyone, then took my seat without complaint. Brittany barely looked at me. Gerald gave me a nod that felt more like a dismissal. Marcus smiled and said he was glad I could make it. I had no idea that this dinner would become the worst night of my life. And then somehow, the best. The restaurant was everything I expected it to be. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. Soft classical music played in the background, barely audible over the murmur of wealthy patrons discussing business deals and vacation homes. I studied the menu and felt my eyes widen at the prices. A single steak cost more than what I spent on groceries in a week. I decided to order something simple, a chicken dish that seemed like the least expensive option. When the waiter came, I asked for it quietly, almost apologetically. Gerald was holding court at the table, talking about a new construction project his company had just landed. It was worth several $1,000,000, he said, and it would put them at the top of the industry in the region. Everyone listened with rapt attention, nodding and asking questions at all the right moments. Brittany talked about her recent success in real estate. She had just closed a deal on a $2 million property, earning a commission that was more than I made in 2 years. She described the house in detail, the marble countertops and the infinity pool and the wine cellar that could hold 500 bottles. Her parents beamed with pride. Marcus mentioned that he was in line for a promotion at the bank. He would be the youngest vice president in the company's history if he got it. Brittany squeezed his hand and said she always knew he was destined for great things. Courtney and her husband shared news about their upcoming trip to Europe. Nobody asked me about my life, not once. I sat there eating my chicken, listening to conversations that had nothing to do with me, feeling more invisible with every passing minute. I tried to contribute a few times, making comments about the food or asking questions about their stories, but my words seemed to evaporate before they reached anyone's ears. At one point, Gerald turned to me with a look that was not quite a sneer, but close to it. He asked if I was still fixing cars for a living. His tone made it sound like I was doing something shameful, like I spent my days digging through garbage instead of running an honest business. I told him yes, I was still running my shop. I said that as long as there were cars that needed fixing, I would have work to do. He nodded slowly, then turned to Diane and made a comment about how some people never aimed for more. They both laughed softly, thinking I could not hear. But I heard. Brittany picked up where her father left off. She mentioned that they were looking at preschools for Emma, only the best ones, of course. She wanted Emma to grow up in the right environment, surrounded by the right kind of people. The way she said it made clear that I was not the right kind of people. I asked when I might be able to see Emma again. It had been months since I had held my granddaughter, and I missed her terribly. Brittany's expression hardened for just a moment before she smoothed it over with a polite smile. She said Emma was very busy with her activities, and her schedule was completely full. Maybe some other time. I nodded and looked down at my plate. I had lost my appetite. When it came time for gifts, I watched as Marcus received present after present from Brittany's family. Gerald handed him keys to a brand new BMW, the latest model with all the features. Marcus's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Diane presented tickets for a 2-week vacation in Europe, all expenses paid. Brittany gave him a Rolex watch that sparkled under the chandelier lights. Then it was my turn. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small box containing my father's pocket watch. I had spent weeks restoring it, cleaning every gear and polishing every surface until it shone like new. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not because of its price, but because of what it represented. 3 generations of my family had carried that watch. I handed it to Marcus and explained what it was. I told him it had belonged to his grandfather, the man he was named after in his middle name. I told him I had restored it myself and that I wanted him to have it so he could pass it down to his own children someday. Marcus looked at the watch. He opened the box and held it up to the light. For a moment I saw something in his eyes that looked like appreciation, maybe even love. But before he could say anything, Brittany laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh people use when they want to make someone feel small. She asked why Marcus would want an old watch when she had just given him a Rolex. Gerald joined in, asking what anyone would do with such an antique. The word antique dripped with contempt. Marcus put the watch down on the table away from the other gifts. He thanked me quietly, but he didn't look at me when he said it. Brittany was already talking about something else, and the moment passed like it had never happened. The evening continued and the wine flowed freely. As the bottles emptied, tongues loosened. The conversation became louder, more careless. Brittany especially seemed to lose whatever filter she normally maintained. Diane, who had been drinking steadily all evening, asked Brittany what she thought of her father-in-law. It was a casual question, the kind that should have received a diplomatic answer. But Brittany was past diplomacy. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were slightly unfocused from the wine, but her words were clear. She said that, honestly, she had been disgusted with me since the very first day they met. She said she was embarrassed every time she had to explain to her friends that her husband's father was a mechanic. She said Marcus deserved a father who had actually accomplished something in life. The table went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Gerald nodded slightly as if agreeing with his daughter's assessment. Diane did not look surprised. Courtney stared at her plate, avoiding eye contact. Marcus said nothing. He just sat there looking down, refusing to meet my eyes. I waited. I waited for my son to defend me, to say something, anything. But the seconds stretched into silence, and Marcus remained quiet. He did not tell Brittany she was wrong. He didn't stand up for the man who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything for him, who had loved him unconditionally for 34 years. Something inside me shifted. It was not anger exactly. It was something quieter and more final. It was the realization that I had spent years accepting disrespect, tolerating cruelty, all for the sake of my son. And my son would not even say a single word in my defense. I stood up slowly. I placed my napkin on the table with careful precision. I looked around at all of them, these people who thought they were better than me because they had more money and bigger houses and fancier clothes. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, because in that moment I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt free. I told them thank you for dinner. I wished Marcus a happy birthday. Then I said goodbye to everyone, turned around, and walked out of that restaurant. The night air hit my face like a cold slap, but I did not mind. As I walked to my truck in the parking lot, I was already reaching for my phone. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat in my truck in that parking lot, staring at the steering wheel, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over me. The engine was off, and the only sound was my own breathing in the darkness. For a few minutes, I just sat there remembering. I remembered Loretta's words before she died about never letting anyone take away my dignity. I had let Brittany take it piece by piece, year by year. I had let her treat me like dirt because I wanted to stay connected to my son. But what good was that connection if my son would not even stand up for me? I thought about all the times I had bitten my tongue, all the insults I had swallowed, all the humiliations I had absorbed with a smile. And for what? To be publicly called disgusting by a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life, no more. I pulled out my phone and called Larry Henderson. Larry and I went back more than 40 years, all the way to high school. We had been best friends since we were 15, playing football together and getting into the kind of trouble that teenagers get into. He had been the best man at my wedding, and I had been the best man at his. Larry owned a private investigation and security company now. After 30 years in law enforcement, he had retired and started his own business. He was good at what he did, maybe the best in the state. And 6 months ago, he had come to me with information that changed everything. He answered on the second ring. His voice was gruff but concerned. He asked if I was okay, said he could hear something in my voice. I told him what had happened at dinner. I told him about Brittany's words, about Marcus's silence, about walking out of that restaurant. Then I told him it was time. 6 months earlier, Larry had been driving past a hotel on the outskirts of Nashville when he spotted Brittany's car in the parking lot. It was the middle of a weekday afternoon, and she was supposed to be at work. Curious, he had waited. An hour later, he watched her leave the hotel with a man who was definitely not Marcus. Larry knew Brittany because he had met her at Marcus's wedding. He recognized her immediately, and he recognized the way she was looking at this other man. It was the look of intimacy, of secrets shared. Larry didn't tell me right away. He wanted to be sure. Over the next few weeks, Larry did what he did best. He investigated. He followed Brittany, discreetly gathering information piece by piece. He discovered that the man she was seeing was named Victor Harmon, a 40-year-old real estate developer who worked with Brittany's firm. Their affair had been going on for at least a year. Larry got video footage. He got photographs. And somehow, he got access to their text messages. The messages were damning. Brittany wrote to Victor about how much she missed him, how Marcus was always too busy with work to notice anything. She called Marcus her ticket into high society. She said his family had enough money to fund the lifestyle she wanted, but Victor was the one she truly loved. When Larry showed me all this evidence, I felt sick. Not because I cared about Brittany, but because I knew what it would do to Marcus. Despite everything, despite the distance and the silence and the abandoned relationship, Marcus was still my son. I did not want to hurt him. So I told Larry to hold on to the evidence. I decided to wait and see if the affair would end on its own, if Brittany would come to her senses. Part of me hoped that Marcus would never have to know. But tonight changed everything. Brittany had publicly humiliated me in front of her entire family. She had called me disgusting to my face while my son sat there and said nothing. If she had any decency, any respect for the family she had married into, she would have kept her contempt to herself. But she did not. She showed her true colors, and now she would face the consequences. Larry asked if I was sure. He warned me that once this was out, there was no taking it back. Marcus would be devastated. The fallout would be enormous. I told Larry I was sure. Then I told him to do it now. Larry had prepared for this possibility. He had a contact at the Capitol Grill, a man named Douglas, who managed the restaurant's audio and visual systems. Douglas owed me a favor from years back when I had fixed his car for free after he lost his job. He was happy to help. The plan was simple. Douglas would access the restaurant's main display screen, the one they used for private events and presentations. He would play the video Larry had compiled. Brittany's family would still be there, finishing their expensive desserts, congratulating themselves on how superior they were. And then they would see exactly who Brittany really was. I told Larry to have Douglas play the video in 2 hours. That would give them time to finish dinner time, to feel comfortable and satisfied. And then the truth would come out. After I hung up with Larry, I started my truck and drove home. It took an hour, and I spent the entire drive thinking about what I had done. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt afraid. But mostly I felt a strange kind of peace. For the first time in years, I was not letting someone walk all over me. I was standing up for myself, even if it was in the most dramatic way possible. I got home around 9:30. My little house was dark and quiet. I turned on one lamp in the living room and sat down in my favorite chair, the one Loretta used to sit in when she read her books in the evening. Her photograph was on the wall across from me, and I looked at it for a long time. I talked to her. I know that sounds strange, but I had been doing it ever since she passed. I told her what had happened at dinner. I told her about Brittany's words and Marcus's silence. I told her about the plan Larry and I had set in motion. I asked her if she thought I was doing the right thing. Of course she did not answer, but I like to think that somewhere, somehow she understood. My phone buzzed at exactly 10 o'clock. It was a text from Larry, just 2 words. "It is playing." I closed my eyes and waited. At the Capitol Grill, the evening was winding down in comfortable satisfaction. The dinner plates had been cleared away, replaced by elegant desserts and glasses of port. Gerald was telling a story about a competitor he had crushed in a recent business deal. Everyone laughed at all the right moments. Brittany was feeling particularly pleased with herself. She had finally said what she had been thinking for years, and nobody had challenged her. Randall had slunk away like the embarrassment he was, and now the evening could continue without his presence bringing down the atmosphere. She reached for her wine glass, thinking about how perfect her life was. She had a handsome husband with a promising career. She had wealthy parents who gave her everything she wanted. She had a beautiful daughter and a lover who made her feel desired. and she had successfully rid herself of her pathetic father-in-law. Then the music stopped. It was subtle at first. The soft classical melody that had been playing in the background simply faded out. A few diners looked up mildly curious. Then the large display screen on the wall flickered to life. The screen was normally used for private presentations and special events. Tonight, it had been dark, but now it glowed with the image of a hotel lobby that some people at the table recognized. It was the Marriott on the outskirts of town. Gerald frowned and looked around for a waiter. He assumed there had been some technical error. But before he could say anything, a woman walked into the frame. It was Brittany. She was wearing a red dress that Marcus did not recognize. Her hair was styled differently than usual. She was smiling at someone off camera, that special smile she reserved for moments of intimacy. Then a man walked into the frame and took her hand. He was tall and dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit. He leaned in and kissed her, not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, the kind shared by lovers. The restaurant went silent. Every head turned toward the screen. At the table in the private section, Brittany's face drained of all color. The video continued. It showed Brittany and the man walking through the hotel lobby, their hands intertwined. It showed them getting into an elevator together, standing close, her head on his shoulder. It showed them walking down a hallway and stopping at a door where they kissed again before going inside. Then the screen changed. Instead of video, it displayed text messages. The messages scrolled slowly, giving everyone plenty of time to read. The first message was from Brittany to someone saved as V. It read, "I miss you so much. Last night was amazing." The response, "When can I see you again, Brittany?" "Soon. Marcus has a work trip next week. We can have 3 whole days." Marcus stared at the screen. His face had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. More messages appeared. Brittany wrote, "Sometimes I feel guilty." Then V replied, "Why? He does not appreciate you like I do." And Brittany responded, "I know, he is so boring. All he cares about is work and impressing my father." Then came the message that made Marcus stand up from his chair. Brittany had written, "The truth is, I never really loved Marcus. He was my ticket into the right social circles. His family has money and connections. But you, Victor, you are the one I want to be with." The screen went dark. For a moment, nobody moved. The entire restaurant was frozen in stunned silence. Then the murmuring started, the shocked whispers of diners who had just witnessed something they would gossip about for years. At the table, Gerald was the first to speak. He demanded to know what was happening, who had done this, how they could stop it. But it was too late. The video had played, the messages had been read, everyone had seen. Diane covered her mouth with her hand, looking at her daughter with something that might have been horror or might have been shame. Courtney pushed back from the table, wanting to distance herself from the disaster unfolding in front of her. And Marcus. Marcus looked at Brittany with an expression that broke something inside everyone who saw it. It was betrayal, pure and raw. It was the look of a man whose entire world had just shattered. Brittany tried to speak. She reached for Marcus's arm, words tumbling out of her mouth in a desperate rush. She said it was not what it looked like. She said someone had faked the video. She said he had to believe her, had to listen. Marcus pulled his arm away. He told her not to touch him. His voice was quiet, controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. He asked her one question. He asked if it was true. Brittany hesitated. That hesitation was all the answer Marcus needed. He stood up from the table. He looked around at his in-laws at the restaurant, full of staring faces at the ruins of what was supposed to be his birthday celebration. Then he picked up one thing from the table. It was the pocket watch his father had given him, the one Brittany had mocked just an hour before. He put it in his pocket and walked out of the restaurant without another word. Behind him, chaos erupted. Gerald was shouting for the manager, demanding explanations and threatening lawsuits. Diane was crying. Courtney and her husband were already gathering their things to leave, wanting no part of the scandal. And Brittany sat frozen in her chair, exactly as the thumbnail had described. Her phone was buzzing with notifications. The video was already spreading. Someone in the restaurant had recorded the whole thing on their phone, and now it was being shared across social media. Her perfect life was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I was sitting in my dark living room when I heard the knock on my door just after midnight. I knew who it would be before I even got up from my chair. Marcus stood on my front porch. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. His eyes were red, though whether from crying or from the strain of the evening I could not tell. He looked lost, like a child who had wandered too far from home. I stepped aside and let him in without a word. We sat in the living room, father and son, in the same chairs we used to sit in when he was a boy and had problems he needed to talk through. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Marcus asked me how long I had known. I told him the truth. 6 months. I had known about Brittany's affair for half a year, and I had kept it to myself. He asked me why I had not told him sooner, why I had let him live in ignorance while his wife was betraying him. I thought carefully before answering. I told him that I had hoped it would end on its own. I told him I did not want to be the one to destroy his marriage. I told him that despite everything I was still his father, and fathers try to protect their children from pain even when they cannot protect themselves. Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he asked another question, and this one was harder. He asked why tonight. What had changed? I looked at my son. Really looked at him, and I told him the truth. I told him that I had endured years of disrespect from Brittany. I had accepted being treated like an outsider, like an embarrassment, like something to be hidden away. I had done it because I loved him and wanted to stay in his life. But tonight when Brittany said those words and he did nothing, something broke inside me. I realized that my silence had not preserved our relationship. It had only enabled his wife to treat me worse and worse while he looked the other way. I told him that I did not expect him to defend me against the world, but I had expected him to defend me against his own wife at his own dinner table. And when he did not, I knew things could not continue as they were. Marcus started to cry, not loud sobs, but quiet tears that rolled down his cheeks as he sat in the dim light of my living room. He said he was sorry. He said he had been a coward. He said he had let Brittany control too much of his life, and he had lost himself somewhere along the way. I moved from my chair and sat beside him on the old couch. I put my arm around his shoulders the way I used to when he was small. I told him that I forgave him. I told him that being his father was the greatest privilege of my life and nothing would ever change that. We talked for hours that night. Marcus told me things he had never admitted before. He told me that he had known for a long time that something was wrong in his marriage. He told me that Brittany was cold to him, dismissive, always finding fault. He told me he had suspected an affair but had been too afraid to confront the truth. He also told me that he was ashamed of how he had treated me. He knew Brittany looked down on me, and instead of challenging her, he had gone along with it. He had let her dictate when I could visit, whether I could see my granddaughter, how much contact we could have. He had chosen the path of least resistance, and in doing so, he had betrayed his own father. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt or lecture or say I told you so. I just let my son talk, let him release years of suppressed feelings that he had been carrying alone. When the sun started to rise, Marcus made a decision. He said he was going to file for divorce. He could not stay with someone who had deceived him so completely, who had used him as a stepping stone to the life she wanted. He said he wanted to fight for custody of Emma to make sure his daughter grew up knowing love and honesty instead of manipulation and lies. I told him I would support him in whatever he chose to do, and I meant it. Over the following weeks, Marcus moved out of the house he shared with Brittany. He stayed with me at first in his old bedroom that I had kept exactly as it was when he was a teenager. It was strange having him back home after so many years, but it was also wonderful. Larry helped us find a good divorce lawyer, one of the best in the state. The video and text messages were powerful evidence of Brittany's infidelity, and her own words proved that she had married Marcus under false pretenses. The lawyer was confident that Marcus would get a favorable outcome. The divorce proceedings were ugly, as divorces often are. Gerald tried to use his money and influence to help Brittany, threatening countersuits and making accusations. But the evidence was undeniable, and no amount of money could change what everyone had seen. In the end, Marcus was granted primary custody of Emma. The court found that Brittany's dishonesty and the public nature of her affair demonstrated poor judgment that could affect her parenting. Brittany was given visitation rights on weekends, but the majority of the time Emma would be with her father. The property and finances were divided, and Marcus walked away with his dignity intact. He lost the big house and the luxury lifestyle, but he told me he did not care about any of that. He had never really cared about it. It had all been Brittany's dream, not his. As for Brittany herself, her life fell apart in ways she could never have predicted. The video went viral in Nashville social circles. Her clients in luxury real estate did not want to work with someone whose scandal was the talk of the town. Within months, she had lost most of her business. Victor, her lover, faced his own consequences. His wife saw the video and filed for divorce, taking their 2 children with her. The last I heard, he had moved to another state to escape the fallout. And Gerald and Diane, who had looked down on me for so many years, they stopped returning Marcus's calls. They blamed him for not controlling the situation, for letting the scandal become public. They were more concerned with their reputation than with their daughter's broken marriage or their grandson's well-being. Marcus was better off without all of them. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus rented a small apartment just 15 minutes from my house. It was modest by his former standards, but it was clean and comfortable in his. Emma had her own room decorated with pictures of butterflies and rainbows. I saw my granddaughter every week now, sometimes more. She would come to my shop with Marcus and watch me work on cars, asking questions about everything she saw. She liked to hand me tools, proud to be helping her grandfather. She called me Grandpa Randy, and every time she said it, my heart swelled. Marcus started working less and living more. He was still at the bank, still successful, but he no longer put his career above everything else. He made time for his daughter, for me, for the simple pleasures of life that Brittany had always dismissed as beneath her. One Sunday, the three of us sat around my kitchen table, eating dinner together. It was nothing fancy, just roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the same meal Loretta used to make. But as I looked at my son and my granddaughter laughing and talking and being a family, I felt richer than Gerald with all his millions. Marcus raised his glass. He said he wanted to make a toast. He looked at me with eyes that held none of the distance or discomfort of the past years. He said he was grateful. Grateful that I had shown him the truth even though it hurt. Grateful that I had given him a second chance to be a good son. Grateful that I had never given up on him even when he had given me every reason to. I raised my glass and told him that family forgives. That is what family does. Larry came by later that evening. He and I sat on the porch drinking beer while Marcus put Emma to bed inside. Larry asked me if I had any regrets about what we did that night at the restaurant. I thought about it for a long moment. I thought about Brittany's face when that video started playing. I thought about Marcus crying in my living room. I thought about all the pain that had been caused by bringing the truth to light. Then I told Larry no regrets. Sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes it destroys things that seemed permanent. But living a lie hurts more. And the things that get destroyed by truth were probably built on foundations that were never solid to begin with. I looked through the window at Marcus reading a bedtime story to Emma. I listened to my granddaughter's giggle carry through the night air. I felt for the first time in years like I had my family back. That was worth more than any comfortable lie. A year has passed since that night at the Capitol Grill. A lot has changed since then, and most of it has changed for the better. I still run my auto repair shop. I still come to work with grease under my fingernails and oil stains on my clothes. Some people might look at me and see a simple mechanic, an old man doing a job that anyone could do. But I know the truth. I know that I built something with my own 2 hands, that I carried on my father's legacy, that I earned every dollar I ever made through honest work. Marcus and Emma are the center of my life now. Every Sunday they come over for dinner and we sit around the same table where I used to sit with Loretta. We tell stories and share laughs and create new memories to add to the old ones. Emma is 4 years old now, smart and curious and full of love. She has none of her mother's coldness. She is pure joy. Marcus has become the son I always knew he could be. He calls me every few days just to check in, to tell me about his day, to ask about mine. He tells me he loves me, words he rarely said during his years with Brittany. He means them, and I feel them. I still miss Loretta. I always will. But I no longer feel alone in my grief. I have my son back. I have my granddaughter. I have Larry and the other friends who stood by me through everything. I have a full life, even without her. The day I walked out of that restaurant, I thought I had lost everything. I thought my relationship with Marcus was over for good. I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone, remembered only as the father-in-law who was not good enough for Brittany's family. But I was wrong. That night was not an ending. It was a beginning. Brittany said she was disgusted with me from day one. Maybe she was. Maybe she looked at my calloused hands and my simple life and saw nothing worth respecting. But here is what I have learned. The people who look down on you are often standing on the weakest ground themselves. They build their lives on appearances and status and other people's opinions. And when the truth comes out, when the foundation cracks, they have nothing solid to stand on. I have something solid. I have love. I have integrity. I have the knowledge that I never pretended to be something I was not. I have a son who finally sees me for who I am and loves me anyway. I have a granddaughter who thinks helping Grandpa fix cars is the greatest adventure in the world. I'm still just a mechanic, but I'm also a father, a grandfather, and a man who never lost his dignity, and that I have come to believe is worth more than any opinion from anyone who never took the time to know me. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone look down on you for who you are? Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like. If you want to hear more stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about dignity and self-respect, please share this video with them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope my story gave you something to think about. And I hope wherever you are, you remember that your worth is not determined by what others think of you. It is determined by how you treat yourself and the people you love. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.